The House of Representatives just voted in favor of the American Health Care Act. That is the plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. And of course, it would strip away some of the coverage and the benefits of the Affordable Care Act. Now, interestingly enough, it turns out that some of the lawmakers that voted in favor of this, some of the lawmakers who initially said that they would be against it and then ended up voting in favor of it, didn't really seem to know much about what the legislation entailed. And so we don't have one example, we don't have two examples, we have several examples for you. And I want to start off with Representative Chris Collins. Now, on two separate occasions, he made it very clear that he did not read the legislation. The first time was when he spoke to CNN. Let's take a look.
Did you actually sit down and read the entire bill plus all of the amendments?
I will fully admit, Wolf, I did not, but I can also assure you my staff did. We have to rely on our staff. I had many meetings within Energy and Commerce.
This legislation affects a fifth of the US economy and millions of Americans. Don't you think it was important to actually sit down and read the language of this bill?
I have to rely on my staff, and I could probably tell you that I read every word, and I wouldn't be telling you the truth, nor would any other member. I understand this bill in its entirety, Wolf, without pouring through every word, and I'm just being quite honest. That's the way it is.
It's like one of the rare instances where he's honest and he's like super proud about it. He's like, no, I didn't read the legislation. Now, after that, he had an interview with Buffalo News, and when a reporter for the Buffalo News told Collins that the American Health Care Act would eliminate funding for an optional program adopted only by New York and Minnesota called the Essential Plan, Collins replied, "Explain that to me?" He also said, so for those of you who don't know what that is, and I didn't know what it was because I don't live in those states, it does provide New York with $3 billion annually for a program that offers benefits for low-income residents who do not qualify for Medicaid. So there are people that are, at the poverty line, living in poverty, and they might not qualify for Medicaid, and this was a program that was necessary to kind of fill that gap. And because of the legislation, the American Health Care Act, and the current wording of that legislation, that funding would be stripped away from.
So let me, so it's a great moment. And again, this is a guy in New York, and I don't think he's in a district that Trump lost. But he is in first of all, I might be wrong about that, but he's definitely in a very, very blue state. Congressman Upton is the guy who came in at the last minute to sort of save this bill from defeat by promising.
By pretending to fix it.
By pretending to fix it with, I think,
$8 billion.
$8 billion for pre-existing
conditions, whatever. But it's only $200 billion short.
So so I'm just interested. So the $8 billion. Give me a sense of the $8 billion. This bill struck $3 billion of protections for New York, right?
Alone.
So which didn't cover all of New York either. Right. So to give you a sense of how meaningless $8 billion is for the entire country.
Good point.
Yeah, so that is a good point.
$3 billion alone won't even cover everybody in New York, and he's got $8 billion for the entire country.
It's a little apples and oranges, but that bill, because that's not for pre-existing conditions, but it just is a sense of, we had legislation in there designed to protect low-income people, and it was $3 billion. I'm sure it didn't protect them all. And it's nearly half of.
I'm sure everybody was covered in New York.
All right. So we got to move along because he wasn't the only lawmaker who made it really obvious that he didn't read the legislation. Representative Mark Sanford from South Carolina, yes, that Mark Sanford that cheated on his wife with an Argentinian woman and claimed that he was gone because he was hiking, was recently speaking to Allison Camerata. And I apologize. And during the interview, here's what he had to say about his knowledge of the legislation.
Did you read this entire bill?
Yeah. I wouldn't say every, yes, I turned through every page. As to whether or not I got through some of the details in some of the pages, no. But yes, I attempted to read the entire bill.
But you glossed over some of it?
You would too if you read through it, yes. But again, it was relatively modest as these bills go. We're talking a couple hundred pages as opposed to a couple thousand pages.
No, this is insane. This is insane. I don't care what excuses these lawmakers have. This is important, and it was a bill that was rushed through. They did not allow for public opinion. They did not allow for proper analysis of how much it would cost. They did not allow for the media to do a proper, analysis of it, so it would give the public the appropriate information necessary to comment. They rushed it, right? And there was no reason, there was no real deadline there, right? They just rushed it. But why? I mean, this is something that's gonna have a deep impact on so many Americans. And I looked through the papers and look through the pages, but but it's important. You should know what you're voting for. And why do we give them a pass? Time and time again, why do we give them a pass? And by the way, this whole notion that, as Chris Collins said earlier, this whole notion that we gotta trust our staff. No, that's not good enough. Can you imagine if I did the show and I got all these facts wrong in a story, and then when people called me out on it, I was like, well, I gotta trust my staff. Irina Nikita, the executive producer of the show, she gave me a summary of these stories. No, that's not good enough. You have a responsibility to do your job, and they're not doing their jobs.
I agree and disagree. I just think we ought to be aware that these guys don't read most legislation.
Yeah, it's a problem.
I got it, but they couldn't comprehend it if they did. The issue is, if I were in Congress, I don't know, I couldn't read, because I wouldn't understand it. Right, it's written in the gobbledygook.
Even with your hair, you wouldn't understand it?
Well, maybe if I did this a lot while I was reading it.
You can tell you would understand it. Just by looking at your hair, I can tell you would understand it.
I sense I'm being mocked, both for my hair and for my statement that you can tell about people from their hair. You can. You can tell a fraud from a hair.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's reel it back in, guys. Let's reel it back in.
By the way, nothing more important than that today. What you would do if I were in Congress, is I would call an independent healthcare group, a actually independent one, or in my case, I would call one that looked at things from a progressive point of view, right? But at the bare minimum, there would also be one slightly to the right of that. It's healthcare. There are responsible parties, and you call them and you say, what are the key components of this bill? Because they understand it, and then they would explain it to me.
No, that's not good enough for me.
No, that is good enough. That's better than reading.
But you know why? Because here's the reality.
How would you understand it?
You know why? This is why I have the point of view that I do. Okay, what I would do, and this is what a responsible person does, what a responsible adult does, because I understand that they're not going to comprehend every component of that legislation. I get it. They're humans, right? We're not all intelligent about everything. They're not experts in everything, but I would read the legislation. I would make notes. I don't know what this means. And then I would reach out to an expert on it to get clarity and make an informed decision. And that is not what they do. Okay?
Well, but that's right. Look, we're arguing about semantics here, because the fact of the matter is your staff could brief you on the important points. You're a person in charge of healthcare.
Yeah.
Then you would look at those points and say, here's what I don't understand, here's what's critical, here's what we need to do. And then you'd call the person in. And then you wouldn't be stumped by that question, because you'd say, first of all, you could go, yeah, I did. I talked about it with my healthcare staff, and I called in these people and they explained it to me, and I think it's a good bill. But we know that none of that happened in this bill, because literally every group is against this bill. Everyone with even a vague tie to healthcare, doctors, nurses, rehab facilities, insurance companies, everyone universally thinks this is a terrible, terrible bill. So we know they didn't talk to anybody who knows.
No, they didn't. And you're right, I guess it is about semantics, and that's fine. But I mean, look, and I know this is apples and oranges, but I have to make a quick comparison, because I think it shows the pass that members of Congress get that regular Americans don't get. So let's say this is prior to the housing market crash. You want to buy a home, you go into the escrow process, you make an offer, it gets accepted, and you go through all of the legal documents, all of this stuff. You have to read so many things that you don't understand, right? So let's say the average American just glosses over the papers, just signs their signature without understanding what they're signing, okay? And then when all of these injustices arise, if the American comes forward and says, I didn't read that specific part, I didn't know, do you think that the banks would be like, oh, okay, that's okay.
No,
I mean, you didn't have time. You didn't have time.
I agree.
You were too busy raising money for your bullshit, and you didn't have time. And I'm sorry for getting all angry, but I just feel like there is a certain standard that every single person in this country has to abide by in their jobs, right? But for some reason, members of Congress, the people who literally have the fate of the country in the palm of their hands, don't have to live by that standard. They just don't.
Podcast the Young Turks anytime you want. TYTnetwork.com/join.
I think it's weird.
No, it's not weird. In fact, you'll think,
I'm like a smart person.
Do it now. tytnetwork.com/join.